approve the minutes.
Oh, really approve minutes.
I'll second that.
Got it in a second by JP. All in favor?
Yep.
Aye.
Aye.
Motion approved. All right. On the fraternization and conflict of interest, I think we'll probably have to wait for Steve.
I don't know where it went. See how that pulled up.
Wondered if you were recording. Wondered if you were working. It's asking. Oh, there you go. I'm here.
We're on agenda item 2.
Waiting on you.
Well, I guess 2.
We're moving already.
One.
Agenda item.
B. B1.
B.
B1, bingo. All right. So you have some links in there. So the last time we had a conversation about this, there was some suggestion that we go out and take a look at the University of Iowa. So the links that you have in there are all pulled from UI, from their policy page. There's 4 sections in there: community, human resources, to their chapter 8 and 28, and then admin, financial, and facilities policies. Those were inclusive of all the ones that we discovered through the UI process. Then you can see some other additions, other documents that were attached there. And I think probably the best course of action now might be to turn it over to Joe. We sent the policies to him for some review, and he had some thoughts on the methodology that we use to consider this and intersection with state law and some other things.
Did you distribute the materials that I gave you about the conflicts of interest? I did a presentation at the Iowa Association of School Boards Convention a couple of years ago.
I can move forward.
On conflicts of interest.
They were on the last time we met. They didn't get shipped before, but we can do that so that they're available.
I'll do
I don't
that.
know who's seen it and who hasn't, but there are some specific state laws that deal with conflicts of interest for public schools. So there's some general ones for public institutions and employees in general, but some that are very specific to school districts. I looked at the university policies, and I question whether that's a very good starting point. You may want to look at other school districts and see what they have out there, because in some ways there's a lot more there than I think is probably necessary, and there's some things obviously that aren't there I think would be good to have. And I guess I'm not completely sure what the impetus is for this, what you're looking for at sort of a conceptual level. I'm going to make a little side comment here about the policies in general in the school district. I think they're a disaster. Just in terms of, they're like no other school district I've ever seen or heard of, including big ones like Des Moines, Waterloo. Somewhere years ago, they got broken into all these various parts, and that I consider to be extremely user unfriendly. I don't know how the average citizen can find anything in there, because there'll be discussion of employees here, discussions of employees there, discussions of employees there, depending on whether it's a legally mandated policy, an administrative guideline, an appendix, or whatever else you call those things. And I think long term, you have to think seriously about moving to a model that is, I don't want to say typical, but much more widespread among school districts. The Iowa Association of School Boards has a master set of model policies. So I think that's really something to put on your agenda for a little bit longer term view. But as far as the policies on conflict of interest and fraternization, I guess I'd like to hear from you what you're looking for, and we can talk a little bit more about what might be the best way to put something together for further discussion and take to the board, if it's really even necessary.
I think Paul's going to have to give some history, because this has been something that's been on their agenda for at least a year, 2 years maybe?
Just under a year, probably. Yeah.
So what spurred that?
Steve, you can correct me if I'm wrong, this was a request from one of our board members to have us look at this. The last group of policy and governance kind of always, it was the last item on the agenda, and if we didn't get to it, we didn't get to it. And then the last meeting before the new board took over, that group decided that we would let this group of policy and governance decide if we wanted to move forward with it. So there hasn't been I've asked Director Hemingway a couple times for what he was looking for on this, and I've never really got an answer. So it's been up to us to decide if it's something that we want to pursue.
So one reason might be if there's a perception that supervisor and employee are having a relationship and that employee gets preferential treatment. Whether that happens or not, I think, if there's a perception of that, then maybe we want to cover that base and say, well, we have a policy and this is what we follow. If there is any conflict with, obviously just the financial piece, if an employee is profiting, whatever, double dipping or, I know I have to fill one out at the university every year, a pretty lengthy, it's not super lengthy, it's just a checklist that these are my activities, I'm not double dipping, and I'm not making any money off of my, outside university gig. It's probably mostly for researchers and professors and that sort of thing, but I have to fill it out as a formality. So, and again, I wasn't there, I didn't ask for this, I'm just sort of shooting from the hip of why you might want a policy in place.
I think to a certain extent that's covered by state law, because
Okay.
if there's a prohibition, you can only receive up to $2,500 compensation for anything that's related to your service of the school district. And that covers every employee from the custodian up to board members. So I think can need to weigh the fact there's already state law there versus the overhead. I think it would be overkill that every employee fill out a form every year.
I agree.
And I don't know if there are any provisions in the existing policies dealing with that sort of thing. I know there's a use of school facilities and school property, and this has come up in some other districts where it's typically one of two things: either a teacher wants to tutor and use school facilities, or it's a coach who wants to use the school logo or school property for camps or selling something. And in general, it's fairly easy to say those are covered by state law. You can't do that. You cannot give away public property. You cannot use your position to generate income. I think it would probably be fairly easy to put a policy in place that sort of thou shalt not. And that's in fact one of the issues with a lot of the policies. They're in this district, there are sort of you shall not do this, shall not do that. Any place in between those lines on the side of the road, you can do anything. And I think some specific language, so I have to look more thoroughly through all the policies, because things they're parked here and there, and there's some logic behind it that can make it really hard to get a comprehensive look on what's in existing policies.
And just for reference, I think you're probably all familiar with it. I pulled this up earlier, but
This is
kind of what Joe's referring to here, the fact that it's kind of grown over time, but so we have ends policies, we have board governance, we have appendices, which, as Phil has asked several times, are not appendices to something in particular. That just is the title of the document is appendix. So it's not an appendice to some other policy. Now we have superintendent linkage, superintendent directions, participation in public board meetings, legally mandated policies, and administrative guidelines, which have become a catch-all for everything that's not included in everything up here.
Looks like a nightmare.
I think if one of your goals is to make things easier for the average person to find, if you just had one set of policies, everything, and try and group them into categories like the Association of School Boards has, where if somebody wants to look and see a particular topic about student or employee, they only have to look one place. Here you have to look multiple places because some employees are covered in one, some are covered in another, and there are some flaws in some of those policies that we talked about another time. But, and I guess it's sort of how much additional overhead do you want to create in terms of the policies that are there. I think I'm in favor of leaner and simpler policies because when you have a simple policy, it's hard for people to say, well, I didn't know there was anything wrong, I didn't understand that. When it's really simple, it's pretty easy to say, hey, you can read this and you're not supposed to do that. And I don't know when you answer your question about preferential treatment by supervisors, and there may be something buried in there too.
In here?
In the existing policies. There's nothing I can think of titled nepotism, but there may be in some of the employment policies. They want to deal with employees.
Well, that was one where I thought the university had something that sounded like it made a lot of sense.
We actually have that in the administrative guidelines and procedures. It's not in board policy. So again, to Joe's references, you can find it if you know where to look for it. So there's an employee conflict of interest administrative guideline. It's number 408. You talked about nepotism. That's administrative guideline 409. So there's some of these pieces that are in place. But what we tried to do with the administrative guidelines is to use it as, I said, a catch-all. So you have all those other things up above. You have ends policies and legally mandated policies and superintendent directions and superintendent linkage. And if an issue like nepotism is something that we're concerned about, which we are, it falls through those others, and if it doesn't get caught in one of those other ones, then it winds up in the administrative guidelines and procedures. Now the issue is, that's not a board policy.
Well, I don't know what it is.
Yeah,
I mean,
we have it listed
guidelines?
on the policy page.
If you go to the website, eventually you can find out what the board policies are. That's not transparent either because it's buried down.
Yeah.
You have to scroll down to it, and then you look at this.
And so technically, those aren't board policies, those are our administrative guidelines. We put them here because if something like nepotism drops all the way through and then gets caught in the administrative guidelines, we at least want someone as a last resort to know to look in the administrative guidelines for things that you might otherwise find in policy. So, like I said, 409, JP, that's the nepotism one that we have in there. And with the second paragraph, no school district employee shall serve in a supervisor capacity over one of their family members employed by the school district. So we've got those in there, but they don't have the force of policy behind them. There are administrative guidelines that we as the administrative team hold ourselves to.
Okay.
Do we already have one for fraternization? That no supervisor can enter into an intimate relationship with someone that...
That word does not appear when I do my keyword search in there.
So that might be something to,
Now, I'll tell you that I was just looking at the admin guidelines and procedures. I do not believe that it's in any of the others after 8 years of reading through them all, but I would want to go back and do a fine-tooth screen to make sure that they're not in there.
I mean, I guess I would, I think we want to be mindful of our time, and if we're going to put the time and effort into because this is true. I mean, and I'll be honest, I just started this today, and I'm like, whoa, what? How can you possibly find anything? I mean, what are you looking for? Where do you look? Where within what you look? And does that cross with anything else that might, this is, so I guess why, and I really don't like reinventing the wheel, and ISB, I'm new to that organization, but from what I've seen so far, good stuff, good materials, good professional development.
We can get the district subscribes to their policy manual, and it's not used for much of anything, but it's a resource that's already available, and it's something that it's developed more for school districts, which tend not to Iowa City's a little bit unique because of its size, but it's not the university either.
Right.
And so you need something that is, I think, is more tailored to public education.
Right.
Because there's a lot of business enterprises in one way or another inside the university. And they don't necessarily look at it that way. But you're talking about the research. A lot of that is, it's almost a business. You have to grant funding externally, and you have things you're doing internally, and they generate revenue and not.
Right.
There's very little of that in the school district.
Because if we are going to do that, if that's something that this committee decides, and then inevitably, that means going through this with a fine-tooth comb and finding how we simplify it, where do we put it? Oh gosh, this was in here twice, we really don't need that. And then we'll see more clearly what any nepotism or conflict of interest or whatever's in there, we'll know, which will let us make a decision about if we need to add anything. And that's kind of what I'm thinking.
I think the first, you've done part of it is identify what are the issues you're really trying to address. Some of it's covered by state law, some of it's covered by federal law because you get into identity relationships. There's Title IX and there's various anti-discrimination laws, things like that overlap over that. And often in board policies that I deal with in other districts and in ISB models, they'll have what the policies and then they'll cross-reference to things like that. And then you see those at the ends of some of the district policies here. It'll be code section, Iowa code, it'll be federal law, it'll be, sometimes they have cases cited in those. So, okay, where does this come from? And if you need more, where do you go look?
I mean, having said that, this is a big job in coming up, bigger job in coming up with fraternization policy. Just sheer that kind of stuff. So I don't really like to do that.
It's kind of, to be honest with you, we would do it in reverse of what we did last time. So last time what we did was we said, let's list out all the stuff that's in all of those things that were up above, and then if it's in the policy primer but not reflected up above, then we'll put it in the admin guidelines and procedures. You'd actually probably go the other way around this time, and you'd say, if we're going to adopt the policy primer as the board policy book, then we would use that, and then we would look at all of the other links that you saw out there and say, is there something in here that's not in there? And then we would bring that back for you to look at and say, do you need now a legitimate appendice? Here's something that is, as Joe said, specific to Iowa City, that's not in the policy primer, that as you adopt new versions of the primer when it comes out, when state law is updated and things like that, that don't get lost. But you would have far fewer items in there, and those appendices would actually then be directly linked to something. So that would probably be the methodology, because we used that essentially in reverse last time.
So is that something we can pull up and see? I went to the thing, but it's a login.
Yeah, I hit that part.
Yeah. I just,
We can. Oh,
Yeah, but
I was going to say.
well, I don't have,
I think actually I have the password here somewhere.
oh, I don't know.
you don't have to say it out loud, obviously.
No, I can pull it up.
It's organized into the, similarly in the numerical categories you see in the
Tell you what.
mandated policies where it's
Why don't we
done.
do this? We'll send you the link, and we'll send you a password to get in. So you can get in and take a look at it.
I don't know that we have a membership for that. I think we went through SFIS.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I think actually what we'll send you is we'll send you the link to the ISFIS primer, which was more cost-effective for us than the IASB policy primer, and it's essentially the same thing. So ISFIS is the Iowa School Finance Information Services Consortium that we're a part of, which is most of the major districts in the state. So we can send you a login and a website for that.
I guess part of it, that's the bigger context, the whole issue of the policies and making them user-friendly and accomplishing what you want. There's also sort of if you want to look at things we've talked about, nepotism and inappropriate workplace relationships and preferential treatment, you need to find out everything that's already there first in those administrative guidelines, or you'll find a sentence here and there and see what's there and be clear about what your goals are.
Right.
You sort of generally understand what they are, but, you've kind of got, you need to know where you want this road to take.
And so, so how does that, so if, let's just say we're going to do new policy here tonight, and we vote on that, and then it goes to the full board for discussion and possible, well, maybe if we change this, we're not too much wordsmithing at the board table, and that would be the process for that. And then as we do this, and if this is what we decide to do, to try to simplify and sort of get everything where we know what our policies are in a clear way, then I think we can get more information from the whole board, like, well, what are our goals here? Because here's where it says blah, 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 and then have that discussion with, Phil is obviously who's been pushing for this. And so,
I guess, has there been an identified occurrence or problem or series of those? Usually when it comes up is because there's been some incident. And they say, we didn't have a policy to cover this. And if there have been, I don't know what they are. You got to make sure you don't have a solution searching for a problem versus a problem searching for a solution. So I think it's, what's that problem out there you're trying to prevent?
Real problem, or just what people think?
Well,
That's what it becomes.
Yeah. And it needs to be something that is a matter of interest to the entire board and the community, not just a board member or a small segment of the community. Because time is precious, and if you're going to take the time to do things, you focus those on what benefits the most people.
But I think that we should take a look at how we want to proceed with the policy before we tackle at least that one.
And I think looking at the policy books that others are prepared, it's more comprehensive, but you may see things in there that address these specific issues, or you may see, if we build this framework, here's where we can put these in. And take a look at and Stephen probably directed the sections in there, what you're looking at in terms of specific issues. But it's a real challenge to find things in there. It took me years, and I still can't find stuff sometimes. And as a citizen, I have kind of an issue with that. I'd be able to look at it and be able to find things.
And the only reason I know where to find some of the stuff is I've just been here long enough that I've had to
You've been looking
poke
at it.
around and
Sometimes you just
find
stumble
it.
across it and say, I didn't know that was in there.
right, and that's where I think I think this, frankly, this bringing up this issue uncovers this, not uncovers, but for me anyway, like, oh.
I think one small sample that Amy and I dealt with at the start of the school year was student directory information. So we were trying to pattern our Power School registration, process and be transparent with the community about what, we said we were, doing in the policy based on what we asked them on the Power School e-registration piece. And I think we found like 3 different versions within the policies and appendices of what we say we're doing and what that language looks like. So it's a little bit all over the place.
And one of the
It's hard to
things
get some
that-
clear direction sometimes on that.
One of the things that Matt highlights with that is something that we really struggle with, and that is there are so many places where things are cross-referenced and connected that we struggle to keep every single one of those pages that I showed you before with all those different pieces updated. So the benefit of working with the ISFIS primer is the legislature goes through, they pass a bunch of stuff, they take a look at all of it, figure out, okay, which policies does this impact? They make all the changes in there. Like Joe said, they cite it at the bottom so you can follow it in terms of which code it's related to. And then when it's done, they send it out. And most other districts then adopt it, roll it up, and it replaces the old one. Our problem is we get it. We can update the administrative guidelines and procedures because that's a wholesale roll-up, but then those pieces that are superseded, remember that's at the bottom of the ladder, those pieces that are superseded by the pieces above that, we have to go through and try to remember where is that located and then make that update, and that leaves a lot of human error, and then we discover that there's 3 different contradictory pieces on directory information, and people in the community are looking it up and saying, you're not doing what your policy says, and then we have to say, where are you looking?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, how much time?
Not
do you
ideal.
spend? And that's expensive.
Well, it's not ideal
And
either.
I don't know if you know, but school districts are required to review their policy. I think it's every 5 years you have to do a complete
Right.
review. And so typically it's done on the basis you pick some this year, some this year, some this year.
Yeah,
So
that's
you're not
what
going to
you
do it
normally
all
do.
at one
That's what
time.
we-
Yep.
We've done some of those, and right now, I think it's the 600 series. So-
Yes.
But we looked at some in the past, and they're repealed code sections, so sections of the Iowa code, things have been repealed, and they're still in there. I don't know, how do you deal with that when your when your policy relies upon state laws and repealed? I mean, that's part of the reason you do it, to make sure they're up to date, but I think the peculiar way that Iowa City's policies are constructed makes it even more of a challenge to keep it up to date when there are legislative changes or court decisions or whatever. So I think there've been a lot of Band-Aids thrown at it. I think it's
Yeah,
time to say, okay, let's take a look at this in the global sense, and maybe say this is too big, we're going to start doing this a bit at a time instead of.
It's like how Lincoln got added onto and remodeled over the years. It's like, doesn't match, and it's all janky, and it's just, oh, fit it in here. So what do we do? Do we just tell you guys to do that? How do we, does the board want to, is that something the board takes on to dig in?
No.
No. Okay, great.
I think what you do is you have the staff provide you with the resources, make some suggestions, and that you try and push out something as close to what you like to see as a final product. My experience has been, and I've been through this in rooms of lawyers, is when you try and do that wordsmithing in a form like that, it turns into a nightmare. I spent the better part of an hour in a room full of lawyers. I just sat there and listened while I talked about whether they should use the word may or might in a sentence. And
We've been in that discussion here.
Deja vu.
to the greatest extent possible, you want a final product that the three of you can say, we're all going to vote for this unchanged, and if you get one more person.
Okay.
And that's not to shove it down anybody's throat, but a committee like that is a terrible place to do a lot of drafting, and hopefully the staff gets you something you can go through.
And just FYI, the last time we went through this process, that's the way we did it. Gail Clota kind of oversaw that. She was my liaison from the board.
Okay.
And I worked with the attorney that we were working with at the time. That's why we have a policy or a section called legally mandated policies. So the attorney we were working with at the time literally went through our policy manual, which is, the typical 3-ring binder, 3-inch 3-ring binder, and came back and said, here are legally mandated policies. If you look in state statutes, these are the only things that the state statutes say you have to do.
Okay.
And that's a shall, right, Joe? That all the things that you shall do that are required. And so then everything else got stripped off and dumped in this pile over here, and that's when we started going through the process of figuring out where to put them. So that's why I said we kind of just worked that process in reverse this time.
I think if you're going to do it, you do it in portions.
Okay.
They're typically organized. There's sort of the board and governance. There's students. There's staff. There's like 100 through 600, 100 through 800 series, and maybe you pick one or two of those. But you start pulling stuff out of other places and moving it in, so you've got a cohesive body you can go to, and it's.
So what kind of time do you need? What's that? What's reasonable? I do feel bad, but I don't feel bad, because this is what,
The 600 series,
Yeah,
I think, is that in February.
That might be the way to
That's
do it.
already, and I don't
Okay.
know, what is that?
Yeah, that might be the way to do it, is to say this year on the chart is the 600 series. So if we then say, what we'll do is we'll use the model 600 series, and we'll go through all the rest of those pages, and everything that's in those pages that we can find that's actually covered in the model series, we would strip out.
Okay.
So we would peel those back, and if you use a process like that over 3 years,
Programming.
we should have
That's an
stripped all
easy
those
one.
others to zero.
Before
So
compliance
that's
reports.
good. I do
The
think,
pruning
though,
process.
if just on the nepotism, or if could could we just pull out all the stuff we have on this so we know?
Yeah.
And that way we don't, because I know,
408 and 409 are the two that I'm aware of. We can comb through the rest of it and make sure there's nothing else out there.
well, so we see what we have, and that way I
Well,
think at the
actually-
board table, that'll help us have a discussion about,
There's some stuff in food service too.
okay,
Yeah.
so this is what we've got.
Sure.
And then we can ask the board, the full board, what are the goals for this? What do we want to do as a board? And then if it's just everybody's, yeah, let's do this, or if it comes to a vote, and whether we want to do that or not. But I think we do have to know what we've got, and we have to understand what people want. And without those two pieces of information.
I think the other thing you have to always bear in mind too is that you have multiple collective bargaining agreements, and you make sure that whatever you do complies with those. And it's typically not much of an issue, but occasionally you end up with conflicts. And then you have, one of the things that just baffles me is there's employees who are not part of an collective bargaining agreement. And so you've got a lot of stuff dealing with certified staff, a lot of stuff dealing with other staff, and then you've got this group of people that's kind of in the gray area. And there are policies in place, but some of them are very poorly written, and they're not clear, and some of them are, they overlap with other things. Appendix 6 is one of my least favorite parts of the policies. It basically says, anybody that has a beef about anything can bring it to the board for a hearing.
Yeah, I just read that
It's just-
today, because
it's
going through, it's like, wow, shall.
And it's
Next meeting.
It's stupid, in my opinion, because it empowers people to bring things to the board that should never get there, and it empowers them to do things that they really have. They may think they have a stake in it, but they don't. The part that really brought that to the fore was there's an employee named Stephanie Van Housen. His contract was not renewed. And some people filed a complaint under Appendix 6 dealing with her employment. She didn't join it. And I told the board, you're not going to have a hearing on an employee's employment when they didn't even bring it. Now, eventually, she did file her own, and we had a hearing, but it brings people, inserts anybody who has, and I can't, the wording is really loose. If they have any issue, they can force it to a board hearing. And you want people to be able to bring things to the board, but also you want it to be done, goes through administrative channels first, typically, and brought to the board. Now, I know that Phil has a beef with that. He'd rather see everything come to the board. But I caught a lot of flack over that because we did not let the Center for Worker Justice have a hearing. But then when she filed her own Appendix 6, fine, we did. Because that was appropriate. If she wants to bring her employment concerns to the board, that's fine. But when somebody wants to carry the water for somebody else without their input or their involvement, I don't think that's appropriate. So I think that's probably one of my least favorites. The problem is there's also is a procedure for those employees like her that fall into the gap to take their complaint up through the administrative channel, and it refers to a non-existent form to do that. So I think that's probably an example of where you've got some employees covered here, some employees covered here, and then the gap employees covered here, and there needs to be something cohesive.
Yeah, well, and we're getting more of those gaps. I mean, it used to be basically principals, teachers, paras, and now we've got instructional coaches, and deans are different, and
Employees that are funded through grants and, yeah.
grants, and so even our bargaining agreements aren't super clean as they used to be, just because of the nature of it.
And FYI, I knew that this was going to be on the agenda today, so we have our monthly union leadership meeting, or bi-weekly union leadership meeting. I did share this with them, and Mitch and Brady said if this goes further, they might want to be involved peripherally in the conversation because they'll want to know how it's going to impact the employees. They asked a question about the fraternization issue, and they said there are a lot of buildings that have spousal employees that are in the same building. In some cases, they're in supervisory roles, although not supervising each other. So how does that work? Mitch used the example, one of our high schools has a assistant principal, spouse works in the building. There's not a supervisory role. There's a different evaluation channel, but they immediately said, wait a minute, does she lose her job if they put this kind of policy in place? And so they said, if we're going to go any further, they may want to be involved in the
Well, and
conversation.
those actually are exactly what I would like clarified, and because I don't, that's the first thing I thought, well, okay, how many people does this affect?
Yep.
And then and we then want to make sure we have a policy that says they aren't evaluating, and.
Yep.
Because we have, it happens all the time in coaching, and, people's kids, we have that, and we don't want to say, we just want to be clear about what our policy is.
Right.
But
I
we
don't know
can't
if
do
that,
that.
I'm saying there might be something that already prohibits an employee from evaluating their spouse, but I don't know if it invented that or if it's really there.
It may be there.
So I just
Go back
think this
one.
brings up, this is why we have to go through this process.
I think the first step is find out what's in your existing language.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
What are the resource models are out there, and then decide how you want to address it.
So what I'm going to do, make sure I've got this right as I'm taking notes here. So my job is to go through the admin guidelines and procedures, which I believe is the only place that we find conflict of interest and nepotism. I will look through the other ones, but I know they're in 408 and 409. I'll pull those off. I also know there's some stuff about food service
Okay.
regarding conflict of interest. And I think there might be something with the business office too. Those are also in the guidelines and procedures. I'll pull those, PDF those, add them to the agenda.
Great.
And then, is there anything else you need right now other
I
than
don't
that?
think we are now. We just said we're going to kind of take it in chunks, hit the
Perfect.
600 series, and whenever that comes up this year.
That's the low hanging fruit, though. It's basically curriculum.
It's a good place to start.
Yeah.
Right.
A couple others. I don't know if this is that publication, the T-size.
Oh, yeah.
I did this at ISB Convention 2014. You can take a look at it. It's got statutory citations and some things in there. And the other thing you always have to remember is that people are real wild cards, and you can't legislate common sense. And I don't care. You could have a stack of policies this high, and somebody will do something you couldn't predict.
Well, yeah, right. Yeah.
So that's why I say you need to think, okay, what's the problem we're trying to deal with, instead of trying to cover every conceivable instance.
Makes sense.
Sounds good.
All right.
Is Joe going to leave or is he staying for the whole meeting? Are you staying for the whole meeting or are you leaving?
I can stay for a little bit,
We're
and I
going to
know.
retain him at least for this one, but then I know
Steve-
you said Appendix 6 too, so
Well, it's on there, so I just wanted to...
we had him sticking around just for 103 too.
Okay. Well, then we'll move on to the next topic, seclusion and restraint policy update. So I know JP provided us with a, this is too, right? Kind of a proposed policy, and I know Lisa's here to talk about it too, so we'll just start with Lisa.
Yep.
Well, I've just been comparing JP's draft to obviously the Administrative Code, Chapter 103, which is narrower in scope and requires some additional things within the district. So I think we just have to discuss what, essentially takes out, removes our ability to physically restrain or seclude for destruction of property and to quell a disturbance is really what essentially, in a nutshell, I think is limits it only to physical safety, which is one of the conditions within Chapter 103. So I think that's a point of conversation. And then the things that we're requiring beyond that, I'm not exactly sure what some of those things would look like. So maybe some additional discussion about. I understand what an inspection would look like, but reporting to the AEA or Iowa Department of Education is not a requirement for any other school district. So I'm not sure. Maybe I just need to hear a little bit more about what that would look like.
Yeah, so this is just a place to start. And like I said in my email, so I pulled this from CCBD, and these would be their, this piece would be their legislative recommendations for legislatures, but I just tried to, change it a little bit to as a district. And so I'm not married to any of this, right? This is just a point of conversation. I think, one thing that so I think some of these things, I guess the big problem is there are things that were required that we weren't doing for a long time, right? That we were not telling the parents what we were doing with their kids, and we called it timeout. And so this is part of my effort to blow open the transparency and say, you know what, we're going to do this the best way we know how, in the most transparent way, in a way that's really going to be best for the kids. And I'm not trying to supersede sort of discipline, right? I don't want there to be no discipline. I believe in discipline. But how we use seclusion, right? So clear, it seemed, right, that we were using isolation boxes for disciplinary purposes, right? Not standing in line, talking back. That was in some of the paperwork that came out. And maybe that wasn't really what went on. So I want to make sure that we're not doing that. But if a kid needs an in-school suspension, that to me is a different story, right? It's a different kind of a thing. And so I'm not trying to override that. So part of me is, one, I just want to make sure we have the best policy for seclusion and restraint for safety purposes in what we would consider kind of in the field of kids who are typically on IEPs, who are having unsafe behavior. And two, I think ensuring that we're putting in this sort of front loading, right? That we have proactive plans, that we're looking ahead. And so some of this we're probably doing really well in some places, and in some places we might not really have a good handle on it. And people might even not know what's available to them as far as resources go to deal with behaviors in general. So, I can see this, I would imagine this reporting to the AEA and D, that would be oh wait, I can understand why you wouldn't want to do that necessarily.
I think we would need to really consult our legal counsel before we just go systematically reporting to anyone. This is extremely highly guarded information. I think what would we want to report, on what level, at what level is that automatically public information once we do report it in that format? There's a lot to consider with reporting, doing anything with this information other than using it for problem solving ourselves.
Okay. I think the other thing you should ask those agencies, do they want you to report it? And if they want you to report it, what do they want?
Well, yeah, and this,
just send the information out, because you're right. If you send out information that's not requested or required, you may have violated FERPA by pushing information out.
Sure.
Without falling into one of the exceptions under FERPA for disseminating information. I would say maybe you check with AEA and DE and say, okay, do you want this? And if you want it, what do you want? What kind of format?
Or not. I'm not, I'm not married to any of this. I do think it's important we report to parents, right? And that's required. And again, sometimes it seems like, it's common sense, but we weren't doing that. We dropped the ball in a big way as a district. And so I think what data do we report? Are we just reporting, so what do we report to DE as far as special ed goes? Reading scores, gains, no individual information, district?
We have a state performance plan that looks at several indicators, like proficiency and rate of inclusion and that sort of thing. I think one of the things that's kind of compounded here in the district is that behavior, and specifically confinement and restraint, whatever we want to call it, is sort of automatically associated with special education, which is not the case.
Right.
These are separate. This is an all-child code.
Right.
So it wouldn't be reported within the special ed realm specifically anyway, because it's not a special ed indicator.
Right.
But it would be more things like the things that how are we doing otherwise, dipsticks of, how.
Is there anything like that for behavior? There's proficiency for reading and math.
Well, we would be looking at IEP rules of behavior and that sort of thing. I'm not aware that we systematically look at those outcomes across the district.
Okay,
I've been in other districts where we have.
okay.
I just don't, if we are, I don't know it. And I just haven't done that level of work yet. But, no.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be frankly fine with just totally striking that.
The reporting.
I mean,
I don't know if those agencies want to receive that information, and we would have to have it heavily redacted, and I don't think it wouldn't be usable in any way.
And if it's not helpful, you know. All right.
Although I think that what we do, maybe it would be helpful to start with what we're already doing. So we're, with our new Chapter 1 and 3 electronic reporting, we have the ability to, in real time, manage and look at that information on a school and district basis. So every one of our buildings does a monthly review of that information, and then we also do a district monthly review. And the purpose of that is to figure out, you know, what cases need help, where are we not getting to the bottom of things. And then we deploy extra resources to the places that we still don't feel like things are under control. We wouldn't be able to make changes in plans unilaterally for students who have IEPs anyway, but what we need to make sure is that recommendations are being made to the IEP team based on good information being collected and all of that kind of stuff. So really the mechanisms of review were submitted as part of our state complaint action plan, and which was received very well. So the capturing the information in a more accurate and real-time way, and then using that information to problem solve for the students, I think is at the individual student level what's happening that will make the difference. I mean, it's really what we do with the case and what are we going to change for the student. It's going to be the most important thing. So we just had to set up the processes behind which we're going to figure out what is that then. You know, we say, well, we're just going to offer better services. Well, that's not a general thing we could just do. We have to have processes set up to help us get to that. So it's really a lot more, actually what do we do about it, I think is way more complicated than any minimum requirements that are in 103. And I guess our question all along has been, is it really more complicated in an individual that we can actually capture in a board policy? You know, for instance, we have the limit to physical safety only. Well, all kinds of things happen that some people might not call physical safety. That would be such a significant disruption to the learning environment and not good for the student that we would need to physically manage a student out of that situation.
So what could we add that would cover, I mean, destruction of property?
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing, which to me isn't automatically a deal breaker. It's more the significant disruption to the learning environment that we will experience in most buildings if we take the ability of staff away.
So that sounds like a pretty broad thing that we could say, significant disruption to the learning environment.
Yeah.
Instead of physical safety, or we could say physical safety and the significant disruption to the learning environment. I mean, I know I'm okay with that level of subjectivity and professional judgment.
Well, in 281-103.4, you know, you'll see that the description of when can we use reasonable and necessary force, I don't know how to further define it and be able to capture all the potential scenarios in which we really need to if these things happen. I guess, to me, if we want a policy, maybe the area of focus is to just more accurately describe and require the preventative systems. We don't have any requirement in the district that buildings even participate in PBIS. We have buildings that don't even say they're participating in PBIS. So that would be one example.
Okay.
Like the things that are in the long run going to make it less necessary that we ever get to this point, would be my suggestion, or where to start with policy.
I mean, that's what I'm, definitely getting at, right? Like I want, because that's what I know as a behavior person, that the reason you don't seclude is you don't get to escalation.
Yeah.
But it just, and I think the things that we're hearing, like at Northwest last night, I'm sure that is our staff, now that they're like scared to seclude or lay hands on, and that now they don't know what else to do. And they're scared. Like, oh my God, what do we do? Help us. Well, what about our behavior intervention team? Well, this isn't an IEP kit. I'm like, I don't care if you have autism or not. Like, behavior is behavior, and de-escalation is de-escalation. And that was a confusion there. Like, well, we didn't, like, there is no help. We need police. And I'm like, well, before we get to police, I can guarantee you there are things we can do. And one person made the comment that there was an incident with a fight, and there's like 6 adults around just escalating the situation, just making it worse. And I've seen that lots of times from, administrators on down to paras and custodians even. And so that's what I want to do, is say, one, there are better ways to do this. And you will save yourself and the kids so much time. I mean, the amount of money we spend in administrative costs when we have, say, 3 administrators involved in an incident that takes them 3 to 4 hours to untangle, is when we could have on the front end had somebody who just didn't say the thing, you know what I mean, that avoided the whole entire incident. And I think that's what I've seen us do a lot, is just this reactive.
Yeah, by putting it, in my opinion, in my experience,
Yeah.
by making things too concrete when they're really not, we actually will end up perpetuating problem.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we aren't able to control a situation before a student has become completely out of control, a lot of times that means there are 2 or 3 hours of completely reinforcing things that happen for that student. So if we have a student running around the building screaming is not something we've said that we will, resort to a physical intervention if we have to. What happens is exactly what you're talking about. That gets a lot of staff and student attention, which is all just makes the behavior work.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that behavior is ramping up instead of getting better tells me that it's being reinforced.
Right.
So that, and we're not doing everything, or in some cases much of anything, at the bottom tiers of PBIS.
Right.
That would be preventative.
Right.
So, I've been involved in conversations where I'm asking people, well, how often have you taught and reinforced the expectations that are building-wide and agreed on by your staff?
Yeah.
Well, we're not doing that.
Right.
That explains a lot. So the
Yeah.
more preventative stuff isn't being done, or isn't being done well enough.
Right.
And
So
not
how do
enough
we?
enough.
How do we get there? I mean, because I know, you get pushback, and probably the history of the district is every school is its own kind of fiefdom. They did their own thing, and that is how it ran for a long time. When it doesn't always work. I mean, it worked for most kids, and that was good enough. And if it wasn't working for kids, even now, I'm sure that our kids at the tip of the triangle are, people know their names, they're very specific kids, their elementary principals remember them, and you can probably pick out in kindergarten who's going to be your problem in high school. And that, to me, has always, and then what I've seen in high school is suspensions, right? Suspending a kid for skipping class. Like, you don't want to be in school, we're sending you home.
Which we don't do anymore.
Yeah.
Just want to say, we don't do that.
Well, good, right? So now, how do we build it in because I'd like to help that process from the board table to say, we got to focus on the stuff that works. And we have people in the district who know what works. So let's bring them in and talk to them and have I mean, that's what I want to see happen, and it's,
So can I paint a little bit of a history for us, and this is me having 2.5 years of history.
Can I just say one more
Yeah.
thing, because I have to go in just
Oh,
a
yeah.
second. So the one thing I'll say that is I think it's incumbent upon leadership to make that happen, right? So we know what those things are. Lisa talks about what those things we need to implement are. I mean, I think that's our responsibility as building leaders and district leaders to say, if those are the things we know that are working, then how are we taking that and implementing those pieces into our building so that that works? And that we're in charge of culture. I heard you say it last time, that's something we can affect, right? So we're in charge of building culture, we're in charge of district culture, and those are things we should be impactful on as leaders. And so, in some cases, we need to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, hey, these are things that aren't going really well, how do we change that, and how do we work at that? So, sorry, I have to go.
Yeah.
There's a band concert, so I'm
I've
going
got
to
a
go
really suit. I want to make a couple of comments. One is you have to decide what you want with this policy. That's a substantive issue of how is the staff dealing with this, and where do they get the directive to do that? Is it in this policy or someplace else? Is it part of the, I don't know where it would be, but having a policy, one of the challenges with policy is people look at them after they've done something. And you're talking about essentially preventative work, and how do you get that out there versus having a policy? So I think you need to, it's a sort of dual focus. What is actually the implementation before the fact versus what's in the policy? And I don't know enough about how this is structured to reconcile that. The thing I want to comment about is the property damage or substantial disruption. I think you should just stick to the substantial disruption and give the people on the ground some discretion. And if they don't use the discretion appropriately, then you tell them they didn't do that, or you change the policy. There's a whole body of law built around when you can suspend and expel students. They talk about substantial disruption, and sometimes it's for things that happen outside the school environment. The one that's really come up lately in the legal circles is social media, where they will attack other students, they will attack staff, and they have their First Amendment right to do that. But when it disrupts the school environment, the courts have said, when it actually impacts the other kids, because remember 20 kids in the classroom and you're dealing with one, and you deprive the other of the education, that's where the courts come down and say, okay, so if it provokes a substantial disruption, unfortunately, you can't really define substantial disruption because it takes so many forms. The running through the class, beating up another kid, hitting a teacher. I was really surprised when we started talking about this earlier. Something like 50% of the workers' comp claims in districts are from teachers and by students. I was astounded. Craig gave me those statistics. It's just amazing, the rate of injury. Now, some of it, the de-escalation is a great idea because it's when it gets escalated and the kid punches the teacher and breaks their glasses. If you can stop it before it gets to that point. That's a whole issue with staff culture. And it's surprising your buildings, some of the buildings aren't even addressing that as a matter of culture within the building.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to get at. That what we have here is a big bundle of issues, and we're trying to treat it from the top down, which has not been effective, and it won't be effective if that's all we're planning to do. And I know that's not what you're saying that this is all we should plan to do, but I think if we have a basket to put our eggs in, it's that prevention and that teaching and looking at it from a missing skills standpoint, a curriculum standpoint, even instructional adjustment, reinforcement, routines, all that entire package that goes into the preventive part so that we don't get this.
We talked about that a little bit the other night in my context. It's easier and more rewarding to prevent problems than trying to fix them after they occur. And if you can apply that same logic here, you need a policy, but the policy is only sort of the tip of the iceberg, it sounds like to me.
And that's so this is where one. I mean, this is something I've just been explaining, obviously as a candidate, and now and as a professional. And I find almost all of the time in those conversations, there's all, like, when we met, I said, what's an IEP? Okay. There's a lot of background. And so behavior, to me, this is the key thing, is that we're still deep in this culture of we've got bad kids and we've got good kids. And the bad kids are making the good kids bad because they're seeing, right? And so right there, we're already on the wrong foot, right? That it's not a bad kid. So we're already ascribing judgment and all these things that lead us to, well, you should be sitting down and you should respect me. And if not, I'm going to escalate that situation. And I know I'm not going to change people's mindset with this, but two things I want to accomplish. One is to establish, because I respect that it's leadership, but we could have different leaders who don't share this, right? Like that could happen. And in any given year, we'll have new leaders, and I don't want to have to say, no, this is how we do it in this district, because if it's policy, this is how we're going to do it in this district. And so even if, again, like I started these recommendations just because I know, this is coming from where we want to come from with understanding what behavior is and is not. And I think even if we had so that's one thing, is I want to set the policy so that anybody who works in the district is like, oh, this is how we do it. And two, it's the public, it's PR. I want to let people know this is what we're doing. And that way, when they say, oh, kids were getting below, things that happened in the past, I can say, and that's not happening anymore. And if it is, it's against our policy. And so even if this were very short and not this long, even if this said something like, we're going to, that we have essentially the proactive piece, the de-escalation piece, I think that will get at that. So that the public says, no, we are as a district doing the thing that we know as professionals is the best way. Like, even some of our own professionals need that help to understand.
Yeah, I'm just trying to recommend that we don't boil that down to be too simple. Basically, we improve curriculum instruction in the district. It all comes back to curriculum instruction. It always does, either behavioral or academic. Our entire MTSS system is built on curriculum instruction. So, what those things exactly are, what does it look like when we're doing it really well? What are all the preventative tier 1 and 2 things that our tier 3 kids need in addition to a really good behavior plan? What are those things? I mean, I think that's the work of, honestly, probably the director group, the director and the superintendent group. What does it look like when we're doing it really well? What would really good, responsive, and differentiated instruction look like? That would, people think mental health is the problem. Most behavior in schools is task related. What are the tasks that we're giving?
Right.
Task related.
Yeah.
What are the tasks that we're giving? How are we determining whether that's appropriate task? What's the formative assessment for you? It's a huge bundle of stuff, but it's all revolves around curriculum instruction. So I just don't want to get it too narrow.
Okay.
Because then we're right back to, well, this is for the bad kids, this is for the special ed kids, this is for certain kids. No, it's not. This is an issue and a problem, and the resolution to it is way bigger than that.
I just want to point out, with the discussion that we just had with fraternization, and we talked about tying it to existing policies and things that we're already using to guide us. We have chapter 103. So this is a great framework, but I think we have to make sure that we don't lose out on things that's already there.
Well, this is Iowa code.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Iowa code, that for me, just seeing this is just pulling out one small piece, and sometimes I just know in my professional world, people see that and say, oh, it only says X, Y, and Z, so I'm going to ignore what it doesn't say and just highlight. Sometimes when you make it too simple, you set yourself up for sometimes even bigger problems. And that's what I don't want to see us end up doing by wanting to create a policy and not necessarily for the PR of what people are saying, because this is a very hot topic, but really trying to focus on fixing what some of the underlying issues are within our district, and then making sure that it's whatever policy we're trying to navigate isn't sort of leading the work of our district. You know what I mean? Sometimes when you throw out a policy without fully understanding what some of that work is being done behind the doors that we pay the professionals to do, that then they're like, okay, well, this is the policy, so we're just going to sort of get our end game to fit into that. And we've seen that, and I don't want this board to then start doing that yet again.
Yeah, I think our end game, as far as our logistical implementation of, the restraint seclusion specific narrow issue is 103. It is chapter 103. I mean, it already gives us that, although I understand what you're saying, and I totally agree with what you're saying, that we have to have a plan, maybe some sort of a pretty a plan that we're pretty adamant about. That things can't just go on as they are, and employing Band-Aid approaches to these narrow sections of the issue isn't going to work. I mean, but maybe that's...
Yeah, and that's not what I want to do. I want a broad, philosophical understanding of how we approach behavior, because I know that works. Yeah, no, please, go ahead.
I said this the other day. I think, I would love to say before I retire that, and I know we've got a lot of staff out there that understand this and believe this, but I don't know that we've got everybody on board. When I say staff, I mean all staff. That, I think in days of yesteryear, we came and thought we were going to instruct kids around academics. And we didn't really think teaching behavior was our job.
Right.
It's completely changed.
Yeah.
And so if we could say, by the time I retire, 100% of our staff, every single staff member, from the bus driver to the principal, understand that part of my role every day is to help teach whatever strategies or whatever around behavior. And ultimately, I think that's the goal, that we have to, for some of our veteran staff, that's been the way that life has been always for them, and certainly is the case now. So.
Well, and that's been reinforced for the most part in our district. That's been pretty easy. We've had these high-achieving kids. That's been reinforced, right? So that, and again, the reason I'm talking this from a policy level is this is what you guys think. And if you're different people in 5 years, I don't, it's kind of like schools will say to me on the phone, oh, we don't need a 504 plan, we'll just do it anyway, until the kids switch schools. And then we need a policy that says, this is our belief. And why I would bring it up is because in my conversations with the current board, it feels like everybody's kind of starting to understand this. I believe that it's like, oh wait, like the boxes or those coming in are oh wow, okay, here, this showed something that we really don't understand a lot of this stuff, and it's still, what you guys are hearing at Twain and at Alexander and Northwest last night, it's just very clear to me that's what's needed is the understanding, the seeing how it works really well.
Yeah, that's why I'm going back to PBIS, because really that's the framework for examining all of that we're talking about.
Yep.
An emphasis going forward on PBIS and MTSS.
Yes.
MTSS, PBS being a smaller part of MTSS, but all that encompasses with academics and behavior, because then that gives us some formal processes. There are some tools we've been taking a look at for evaluation to help our system around MTSS. The whole PBIS process, that's part of it. Looking at your own system in your building, which is really building specific. But we have some buildings that don't even say we're doing PBIS. They won't even use that terminology at all. Well, all that does is put them at a disadvantage for having a framework of how to look at everything that we're talking about.
I'm wondering who those buildings are, because I can say without a doubt that we have got a plan at K6 for sure that either our buildings have all been involved in training in the last 2 years, either in PBIS Tier 1 training or Tier 2 training. So
secondary.
Right. So our
High
junior
schools.
highs are involved as well, I believe. Liberty is tiptoeing into it as kind of a first.
It is. So City and West.
Yeah.
And I get that, but even when it's being done,
Right.
to do it with fidelity
Exactly.
is another thing, right? But the start is to start to do it. So then, And here's what's hard. So I wouldn't want to get as specific even to mention something like PBIS, which is very, like, a certain, but I do believe MTSS, right? Like that concept. And if we had something that said we look at behavior through this multi-tiered level, so I use School Connect curriculum. It's super user-friendly. And I would use it in the BD room. I think they bought it throughout the district and have it. But that is social emotional curriculum that every kid needs. Every kid needs to understand these things. Because now I end up teaching it to the high achieving kids who are in the inpatient unit. And they don't understand emotional intelligence. They're really good at IQ, but emotional intelligence is like, this is a new concept. But that's the key. And I mean, certainly, every junior, and that's why we kept wanting to say this at Northwest last night, like, what are you guys doing? So is it tier 3 at the bottom? Tier 1? So what are you doing in tier 1? Like, so that's what I want to know.
What's your universal instruction?
What's the universal instruction surrounding social, emotional, and behavioral health?
Yep.
The answer should be PBIS.
They do have PBIs, but again,
Are they doing it with Fidelity?
Right.
Fidelity, do they know what?
But that's part of PBIS,
Yeah.
doing those
Fidelity checks.
those fidelity checks. And PBIS is just the framework
Right.
behind which we're doing any given, we can have lots of social, emotional curriculums, whatever.
Whatever.
But I mean, I'd say most districts don't actually have a written curriculum around behavioral skills. Which could be, that's why I keep on saying it comes back to curriculum and instruction.
Mm-hmm.
What are we even trying to get kids to do? We just know when they're not doing it. We haven't even defined what that is. But that might be part of the PBIS, is that we establish expectations throughout the school, and that staff does the hard work to define what are we trying to get them to do, not just identifying when they can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I keep putting it into the package of PBIS, because that's all part of it.
Right.
I'm wondering,
And research-based.
I'm wondering if you guys would be interested in an upcoming Board Education Committee meeting, hearing about what we are doing in the area of behavior
Yes.
at each of the
Well, we have
tiers.
something else big that we wanted to talk
Yeah, we can
about.
do it at the one following that.
The first one that we talked about, the castle program.
Yeah.
The
but
cap-
You have
January-
Castle, and we
February or
have,
February.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yes, you can
Then
sign
you
up
could
that
ask
anytime.
lots of questions, and we have the directors here that are really in charge to tell you what exactly that work looks like and how those checks are being done, and the level of technical assistance that's available to some of our at-risk buildings. So not only do you get the training, but what does it look like? Some of the conversations that we're having around here is typically in a PBIS training, you're sending your small core group to, right? And then they're coming back and trying to relay the information. But some of the conversations we're having is, what do we maybe need to go back to with the entire staff, maybe potentially in our high at-risk buildings, start there. I don't know what that looks like, but the entire staff gets a full day training, so it's not through the PBIS team always in behavior basics or something like that. So those are discussions that we're having just here at the central office level with some directors and myself. But I think it would be certainly interesting, because with the advent of that director of learning supports position last year and Laura Daly taking over the role, she has way more oversight in the area of behavior than we've had in recent history. So years ago when we had this grant, PBIS is part of it, but PBIS always came on as invitational. If you had 80% of your staff on board with completing a survey that you had interest, you did it. Well, in this day and age, we can't, we're doing it, guys, And so I would say in the last year and a half, we have been very planful at getting either, like I said, the tier 1 or tier 2 support, because buildings in the intermediary had been doing their own due diligence to try to stay on top of things. But, without a standardized approach or somebody with strong oversight managing all of that, we're getting better. We're by no means where we need to be. So the other thing that I think I see, and I painted this picture a little bit with our principals today, is for some of our buildings, I feel like we're in a little bit of a kind of it's not a good word to say perfect storm situation, but between kind of the political pressure that we're feeling, information in the news or whatever around timeout seclusion, the timeout seclusion task force. I just think there's layers after layers of things. We're implementing this new seclusion and reporting system where the data is live for teams to look at. That's awesome. We've got our CSIP goals now saying we want to reduce our suspensions overall X%, and then for these subgroups X%, right? I think there's a ton of just pressure. Mary Richardson state complaint that goes to the DE around our timeout rooms. there's a ton of pressure. And so then we're feeling a little bit like, do our buildings feel a little bit more like they're in this disruptive state? Have we swung so far to the right where we're like, my hands are completely off students and I'm scared to death to do anything. I'm scared to death to suspend. So we're trying to, I think, wrestle through some of that with our staff, get as many questions out in the open. Laura Daly and I are going out to, there happens to be a PBIS Tier 2 training tomorrow with about half of our elementaries participating. So we want to hear from the group about some of these things. And I know some of this is, these actions or disturbances that we're hearing about or hearing from staff are isolated more so to our at-risk buildings, but I'm not so sure other buildings might not have some of those questions.
And one thing to think about is because we're still doing business in all buildings that suited a different clientele than what we have now. We can't restrain and seclude our way out of this issue. It's too pervasive. It's not one or two cases around the district. I mean, we have lots and lots of kids who are, because of lack of the appropriate services at a lower level, are rising to this level. That's because it's a redesign, not just doing more of what we've already been doing. So I think that's, to me, people are working as hard as they can. They're doing everything they know how. We have to think of it differently, and they have to be taught to do something differently, or else we're going to continue to have the same results. We're not going to go back to the kind of population that maybe was here 20 years ago or whatever. That's true everywhere in America, really. Kids are only going to get harder.
We have some really, really extreme behaviors that we do. It all goes back to prevention.
It does.
So do we have, so now I'm thinking into one really narrow, just defining what spaces look like and how, and not so much when we can and cannot use them. And that would be helpful. So, because I believe we are doing this, and so codifying it to, this is what it looks like in our district if we do this. And then a broad statement that's something about the way we think about behavior, the way we see it as curriculum, the way it's MTSS is, I don't know, because I don't want to create things that just, oh, now we have to do it this way, and it's this narrow thing. I understand really how broad this needs to be, and I know, meeting with Laura Daly and you, Lisa, and how I really feel optimistic, and this is kind of the message I'm giving people, that we're seeing these intersections and we're doing things about it in that way. But if the team changes and that goes away, we could easily be back to square one. And I just, that I don't want to lose this opportunity we have now to codify these good practices, because I don't care, 20 years from now, de-escalation is not going to be a bad idea. That's not a fad. No, go ahead.
To me, and I can just tell you my previous experience in 9 different school districts now, that direction from the board would have come through the superintendent goals. So if we know MTSS and PBIS is where it's at, then that's the focus of the superintendent goals, and then he gets his team to do it however he sees fit. I'm afraid to narrow it to policy because I don't think it'll work that way. I think we have everything we need, including the vague description of areas where we can seclude students into, because it really needs to be that vague. I think as a district we can say we're not using these areas, the temporary and portable areas, we don't think are sufficient. We think we can do better than that.
Well, we get rid of those, right? So then we don't even have to
Yes.
talk about them, because it won't exist.
And from a student's perspective, being secluded in this area is different than that. So, so I think the things that we need to do on that piece of it, we're able to do just because we want to as a district, and we're proceeding ahead with that given the confines that we've been given through 103. But the direction of the district instructionally and how are we going to support and define behavior across the district, to me, that's the superintendent working with their team. And deploy as necessary, because this is what we need to have happen. MTSS and PBIS are well-rooted in everything great about research. So, I mean, you know, and how that happens, I guess that's the magic of leadership to me.
But if that changes, right, so a policy is going to last for a long, you know, it's going to outlast the folks in this room. And I guess that's, you know, because I can trust folks right now, but can I trust them 10 and 20 years from now? And that's where because we do have policies that direct some other things and tell the superintendent, do that, you know, so I don't want to get into how you do it or tell this person to do that, but I do want to make sure anybody in those positions understands when they're coming in, you know, this is what Iowa City is deciding to do. I mean, do other districts have?
I'm just used to the board has one employee.
Right.
And that person, we have enough faith in, and we've given them enough direction that all of this stuff is going to pan out. And how he does it, that's none of our business. We don't care how he does it. That's just what I'm used to.
Right.
Because that's a leadership piece.
Yeah.
You know, those are leadership issues. Within vaguely descriptive policy, that's just what I'm used to.
So what could a vague policy look like that might get at some of this?
Beyond Chapter 103 and the way it's specifically written to be.
Because there's nothing in there about preventative, there's nothing there about de-escalation, there's nothing in there about proactively planning for when you know kids are probably going to be an issue.
Well, de-escalation is alluded to in here.
Is it?
Yeah. And I'll have to pull it out. But yeah, it's, you know,
But then if that's
other
true,
means have to be tried and so forth.
I mean, Chapter 103 was there 10 years ago.
Maybe one thing, and I haven't wanted to insert myself just because I've been looking and thinking through this. You know, when we built our board strategic plan, we adopted goals that we knew would be at least 3 years. And we looked at reading and math. We went through that whole process of leadership for student learning. And I know Harry would be kicking me in the shins for this because he only wanted 3 goals. You know, everything you read is no one should have more than 3 goals. I should have more than 3 goals. Lisa should have more than 3 goals, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't think necessarily it fits as a separate goal as I'm looking at it under equity, but there may be some consideration for us as a board and admin team to consider whether or not we want special education as a 4th goal. I'm not necessarily, because I don't know, I want to say that we want to replace any of the other 3 goals, but this is where I would get in trouble with Harry, who doesn't want us to have more than 3 goals.
Well, I hear what you're saying.
But it codifies it, because I think one of the things that it gives that you're looking for is a level of prominence, a level of certainty in terms of focus, priority for resources. It gets at some of what Lisa is talking about, which is the imprimatur, the stamp that comes from the board, then through the administrative team and into the classroom. Because of what Amy and Matt are doing with the CSIP, with the Comprehensive School Improvement Plans, there's a requirement now that you can't build a building CSIP without having in it reflected the 3 board goals, the 3 district goals, rather, which they would hate if I told them if they know how to 4th what they'd plug in there. But that might be a way to do what you are seeking without necessarily having to have it be a policy, because the way that we have then built out that goal drives the SMART framework that we put in behind it, which says, okay, these are the 3 things we're going to accomplish, and this is the way we're going to do it. And that's that opportunity to have that dialogue and maybe put some of those things in that might not be in 103, but we want to see reflected in our practices.
I appreciate that. I wouldn't want to make special ed because it's not special ed. It isn't a special ed issue. This is a district.
That's true.
I think it fits really well under school climate.
Maybe that's the goal.
So we've got the goal, but then how can we leverage that? Because I get that this is a leadership thing, but because we're not there yet, and some of the stuff we've just started, and you know, I mean, you guys have seen, you'll see the pushback, and I mean, you'll get it's the kids' fault. I mean, all that stuff is going to be out there, and I understand that, but I want to. So maybe if we talk about climate, and there's something that Steve's talking about where we build these SMART goals, there's something in there that's really specific to, because this is climate. It is our school climate. The climate of these schools is just putting out fires all of the time, it sounds like. And so you have no time to reflect and what are we doing and how. You just literally have no time, and at the end of the day, teachers are just wiped out if they're not quitting and looking for other jobs. So within school climate, because obviously that's based on the Public Policy Institute stuff. But this is all a piece of it too. That is all very intersected between how we view the kids' behavior, our idea of, ideas of culture or lack of awareness of different things. It's just all kind of mixed in there. But I think we get at it all with the Tier 1. That's where we're going to do it, right? That's how we're going to do the climate. Is the Tier 1 for our teachers as well? I mean, we do MTSS, we're all doing MTSS. So what is that Tier 1, and how does climate, and then how does behavior inform that climate piece? How do we see behavior, and what is our sort of mindset around that? I do think we have to do something to explain this to the public. And it has to be short. We have to give them 48 words where they can understand. And I get we're not gonna, I know that there's more to it, so we give them the 48 words. It says, this is the new direction. We're sorry we messed up. This is what we're doing now. Hold us accountable. And then if you have questions, I can get into the very deep detail on that, because this is, I don't think there is a lot of understanding about this stuff in the general public. The general public probably still absolutely has the concept that there are bad kids. I don't want my kids going to school with bad kids. Why are you sending all the bad kids to my school? Oh, now you're sending the bad kids to that school. And
we need to improve what we're doing for all students.
For all students. And some of that takes the shift to understand all students, that we're educating them all, and none of them are bad. Like that's just a mind shift, that the behavior isn't what we want. The kid is missing skills. And because that's what I want us to do as a district. I want us to forget about the judgment and focus on skills, because it's all about skills. No kid wants to mess up. No kid wants to be suspended. No kid wants to drop out. But I've met kids who don't know that, and they're 16, and you're not going to tell them anything different. And now most of those kids are literally in jail, right? Because they just still, But if we shift the whole mindset of the district, we all know. We know how it can work. We've seen it work really well with really challenging kids. And so that's kind of what I want, because I'd like to have I want to say, and this is what I do say, and Lisa, you're my new champion, so, because I'm like, Lisa Glenn, I'm telling you, this is a different mindset. And people who know already know. Like, they already get it. It's those people who don't know what they don't know. And I'm not talking about the people who are going to yell no matter what. It's all those people in the middle who don't know what to think, and they don't know quite who to listen to, and they're hearing this thing, and oh gosh, now you see that video, and of course we all respond to propaganda by like what it's designed to make us do, like freak out, and oh my goodness, this is the end of the world. So how do we then, I guess, where can we go with that to sort of get this message out, this sort of simple?
We have a good plan and then we stick to it in spite of the noise. So that's just noise because it's not helpful.
Right.
It doesn't help us determine what is the best way out of this present situation.
Right.
For that, we look at best practice. All of that we just talked about is PBIS. Mm-hmm. All of that discussion of all of that on a building level, definition of what we want kids to know, understand, be able to do, all of that is PBIS.
Right.
There isn't a better framework because there isn't a better framework.
Right.
I mean, that doesn't dictate a certain materials or certain, it's the framework by which we start to look at what's actually going on.
Lisa and I were out at Wood staff meeting, spent about an hour and a half with them last week, and they had a lot of questions. When you think about it, it really is, oftentimes we find ourselves talking about the kids at the tippy top of tier 3, whether they're still gen ed kids, but maybe haven't received special education services, or maybe we're talking about the kiddos that are in the behavior-focused classrooms. But really, it takes a full court press to make sure that all of the tiers are functioning at high levels so that kids aren't slipping up when they shouldn't be to the next level, and then unfortunately up to the next level. And so again, I would just go back. We not only are providing that tier 1 training about classroom-wide expectations, common area expectations, but we have really defined opportunities now about what our tier 2 supports can look like. Check in and check out, that's modified if that's not working. SAGE groups. Brentwood AEA is about ready to push out some tier 3 training, but again, about half of the elementary buildings are in one tier training and the other half in the other. So not all of them have the same exact information right now, but they're getting that over a 2-year period.
But how well are they actually doing?
Right.
And I think is the question at this point.
Right.
We're talking about the canary in the coal mine.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about the end result of the worst case scenario of what can happen when none of this stuff is firmly in place. Because there are some kids who it's going to happen more often for some kids when those other tiers of support aren't available. I mean, kids who have at one point had really significant behavior issues look a whole lot different inside of a building that is functioning really well in that area and has already worked through the process. But we have one building who I know for sure, we did observations a while back about the implementation of tier 1 supports. And this is a building that we've sunk extra resources in and we've heard a lot about. And we find out that it's about 45% implemented. That's not enough. It's not enough in any building, but especially in a building where it's going to have to be 90% implemented to really, really effectively reach those students. So I think all buildings are in various stages, of implementation, and some are not in any stage at all. Maybe the message from the board is this is the solution because it's evidence-based. Do we have a defense in not doing what is evidence-based when we've heard time and time again from staff, from parents, from these
So then it
educators?
becomes a board, again, goal, part of our goal and not necessarily a policy, because it's not targeting just a subset of kids, it's for what we want for all of our kids.
Right.
So I think the goal ties back to findings. We want something concrete and very specific that people can latch onto what our vision statement is. That's figuring out how to get that essence in that, as well as updating our goals that we've started that conversation and working towards. I think Jen had sent out a rough draft of that conversation with some information there about a week ago maybe. So I'm not sure it's creating that one policy based on a lot of the information that Lisa shared.
Yeah, I think I would go back. I think something that gets lost is on our strategic plan is this is really what the district and Steve focuses his work on are those 3 goals. It's something we talk about and we know the public may not realize it, but that's really what you guys work off of. The district goals said increase the participation in basketball. That's what Steve would have to do, So adding a 4th goal on there, I think that captures all of this. I think,
or just stick with school climate, right?
Right. It just becomes.
When I read the goal there, it doesn't if you want to be pointed out. And when I read that goal, it doesn't really capture that. I don't think.
So then my 4th goal would be that we implement. And the reason I'm hesitant to say PBIS because that is one
But you could say MTSS.
Or MTS, or research-based best practices.
Do that too.
MTSS
With an
structure.
MTSS is supported at the state level, so from
Yeah.
that standpoint,
MTSS.
PBS fits inside there, but the overall requirement from the state is an MTSS component.
Okay,
Which includes PBIS.
Right,
right, right. And that's why, I mean, just because PBS is its
right.
a certain kind of it, which we use and is great, and we because it's, and now, and this, you know, we don't have to spend a lot more time on this because I'm hearing the fourth goal. If it's MTSS, if that's going to help get, so a principal can't say no to that.
I can't say no right now.
Yeah, they can't say no right now.
Well, but
Yeah, what they're doing for MTSS then becomes the issue.
it becomes the issue, and I don't want people just to say yes.
Mhm.
It's got to be fidelity.
Right,
And so
gotta be enthusiastic.
it's got to be enthusiastic. So how do, and so this is just, you know, my fishbowl, but how do we get them there? Because it's, you know, probably they're doing some things. It's like differentiation, right? And teachers fight it. And some of them are already doing it and don't even know it, right? Some really good teachers have already been differentiating. They don't even know it. And then you throw a name on it and they get mad. Because, oh, here comes this again. But boy, when you see it work, I mean, can we get people in buildings where this, maybe not in this district or in this, where it's working really well?
It's working great at Tate.
Well, that's such a different environment. I mean,
I know.
a big comprehensive high school
Yeah.
that does it well, and they're like, oh, wow. Because it's not going to work if you just go tell them they have to do it. They're not, people don't, it's like telling the kid they have to do the thing, and I don't know that. I think if it's not from this visceral place, it won't have fidelity.
Well, that was what made AFT work in the end, the focus time, is the principals and the teachers went to the schools and heard from the principals and the teachers that, oh my goodness, put this in place, give it 2 years, it's going to change the way teachers work with students and students work with kids. And they kind of went in, do I have to go on the tour? Yes, you have to go on the tour. Then they came back, and at first it was, you do the pilot. No, you do the pilot. Then they came back and they all said, I'll do the pilot. So there's something to be said from seeing is believing and hearing from your peers.
Yes, and
Not-
not your supervisor.
Yeah.
I think, people should be accountable to the results. The people in the system who are supposed to create that buy-in are principals. That's what research says.
Right.
The principals are the most important administrators in the whole system.
Right.
So we have to equip them with leadership capacity and an understanding of what they're leading toward, and most importantly, an accountability for the results. That might look different in different buildings. What the principal actually has to do to create that buy-in to get the results. But it really, in my opinion, all starts with accountability. Here's where we need to be. Here's where we currently are. We can help you design a plan to get there. We can provide some direction and tools from the district level. But getting staff every day in classrooms to implement things is never going to be possible for the district level.
No,
that has
right.
to be the principal. But I think that principals have to have a clear understanding of what it is they're expected to produce. Because that honestly is not clear. And unless we have building trajectory toward really clear goals, it's not going to be clear. But that's another thing within the PBIS framework, is that there are general targets for levels of implementation at each tier. And a lot of that is collected from staff. That's one reason why I really like it. It's all about the staff doing the work together.
So, but we have, the principals really have to buy, and that's why they have to be really sold on it, because otherwise they're not going to be able to get staff buy-in when they don't have genuine buy-in.
Yeah, I think that accountability piece is really important to that.
Okay.
If I know I have to produce this result and I'm going to be held accountable to produce this result, I think that means that it's now my job to figure out what is the very best chance of producing this result. And I'm open to a lot of input about that if I know for sure I'm going to be.
Because what I'm afraid of sometimes what happens is if the accountability piece is fewer suspensions, there's just fewer suspensions.
Right,
There's
yeah.
nothing.
Not a change in behavior.
Yeah, no, we don't.
Yeah.
And fewer seclusions, they're just not restraining kids who need to be restrained.
Right.
Because I think there is a lot of that, like, I don't want to get in trouble, I don't know
Yeah.
what to do. And it's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, I think that that's been the result of what's already happened.
Right.
That's why I don't want focus to continue to be at that level,
Uh-huh.
because it's just going to make it worse.
Because I mean, and that's part of what I want to get at for people is to let them know when it's okay to do this. Like, there's
Yeah.
absolutely times when this is what needs to happen. And that piece, I'm not so, like, I'm not worried about the people who are at huff puffs. That doesn't, I don't lose sleep at night. But I'm worried about those teachers who are like, now I don't know what to do. And so then, people do get injured, and kids obviously lose a lot of educational time. And so how do we give them, I don't know, can we?
Well, we're already working on that.
Mhm.
I think that's the improved training. We have really improved our training, especially, through the new CPI protocol, but I think the systemic way we're doing training, and looping back around with people to process the exact of what happened, there's just no easy story. There's no way you're going to take this online training and you're going to get all trained up on restraint and seclusion. It's not that simple. And it requires ongoing coaching. So those are the processes that we're setting up specifically for the restraint and seclusion. I do feel like we have a good process underway for that level of work there. And I just don't want to enforce anything beyond the 103 because it's going to tie people's hands. It really will. But if there's a job to be done, it's at that preventative level, which could use a lot of support.
Do you feel that people are, because I've heard the perception that, well, that's a special ed thing.
Yes, I do think that is exactly what the perception is.
So
is that
how
these are
can
just
we
the kids
say-
we're talking about. I do say it every day. I do say it every day.
Well, but if we have a principal, I'd like to say, if you're having behavior problems in your school, you call in our behavior team, because they know it. It doesn't matter what. And so it could be individual behavior, but I'm talking about group, school-wide climate behavior. And I want them to, be able to feel like, no, I'm going to call, if it's you, or if it's you, or if whomever, but the people who know what to do work for you, right? Like, those are the folks, that's my perception, our interventionists and our behavior
Yes, but we
coaches.
can't intervene our way to the real solution here, which is larger. Those are coaching conversations that
Okay.
all the people who are in charge of coaching,
Okay.
the principals and teachers in school in buildings and the coaches in buildings, we send a message one way or another. We say this is a special ed problem or all means all.
Mhm.
So there really isn't, it's really either one or the other.
So could we, because I know we have a big, that's the stuff I feel very confident about, is the systemic long-term changes. I think to do some intervention now, some of this, like what, Alexander had probably, you guys got some resources there. And
The technical assistance too is important key here. The technical assistance to me is almost more important than the additional FTE that they got. So when we're talking about what does that look like, well, actually it's kind of supported all 3 tiers.
Yeah.
So it went back to classroom tier 1 fidelity checks. We had X amount of kids on tier 3 plans. The AA staff assigned to that building went from the bottom up. The behavior interventionist attached to that building and the behavior analyst that supports the BI went from the top down to shrink and get those plans in place. So it's and then we also recognize from there, we have some kids up here in tier 3 that really didn't need to come out of tier 2 at this point. So again, it's technical assistance.
Yeah.
And it was some additional FTE to support that's going to eventually be weaned away. But that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. And so when Lisa's saying on the special ed side, we have these behavior supports. We do also on the gen ed side. So we have in our 6 high needs buildings, we have the behavior interventionist role that are unique to those 6 buildings, and then a behavior analyst that supports those 6 behavior interventionists.
Do we have that at secondary at all?
I don't have secondary structure, sorry.
Okay.
My people are across the
Yeah.
pre-K.
Because what I hear from staff, FTE, and it's like, really? You think one FTE is gonna solve this? And to me, it's like, no, you need this technical assistance. So maybe what it's, I mean, PBIS is good at elementary, we're working on it at secondary level, but it feels to me like, and it may be an opportunity more immediately to go in and say, hey, to do that technical assistance at secondary level, to say, okay, we have a thing for you, and it's going to take a while to get there, but let me show you how it can work for what you're going through right now.
And part of the challenge with that, and we've had this conversation, is and you used this analogy before, and I really like it because it's one of the things that we see from the outside looking in, is that there's a lot of firefighting going on. And the problem is, I fight fires today, and they're there tomorrow, and next week, and next month. And if we don't, and we talk about it in terms of plan implementation, and that part is, if you don't build a system that prevents tomorrow's fire, you're never going to get to the point where you're not coming in every day and being a firefighter. So if we want to get to that point where we're not a firefighter, we got to put a lot of effort into today, because we still have to put out today's fire,
Right.
but we have to prevent tomorrow's fire. And that's where we're really struggling, is the fidelity of today's firefighting is inadequate, insufficient, and that's preventing the prevention work from actually occurring. Or in some cases, in some of our buildings, it's not even being discussed. So they're struggling with the, how do we put out a fire, not even thinking, boy, if we would do some prevention work, we would have to do this tomorrow. And then they come in tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, and then they come to us and they're like, I'm exhausted. Like, well, yeah, because you're putting out fires every day. Let's stop that. And
Calling in sick.
we've got some cognitive dissonance going on there, because they're not seeing, oh, hey, if I did PBIS with fidelity, I wouldn't have to put out a fire next week. And that's where we're just, I don't know, we're not seeing eye to eye. I don't know how to describe what it feels like when we're having those conversations about, here's tools to prevent, please use.
Yes.
Yeah, nobody can work harder. I think people are working really hard.
They
It's
are.
a fundamental redesign of the way we do business.
Right.
It is,
Right.
from the ground up.
Yeah.
That's a really hard thing for people to get their mind around.
Yeah.
So in some ways, some of the urgency being created through some of the things that have naturally happened is probably in the end game, a good thing, because it is prompting people to think, crap, we're going to have to do things differently, in a different way, not more. I don't think anyone can do more.
I call it the Trump
It's not
effect.
that.
No, people are working too hard. It's too.
Doing some of the things that are promoting this
It's
problem.
every tool, wrong tools, it's harder, it's pretty hard to get screwed in the wall with a hammer.
Yeah. So then next the question is going to be, so then what do we do? And we need to have an answer.
So I'd like to, I can understand how policy may not help this, but I really want us to keep that focus on MTSS. If the four, I don't know if I care if 3-4 goals or, but I want the whole board to get on board with MTSS. You know what I'm saying?
Well, that's why I'm saying if it's a fourth goal, it's our district goal. We review that twice a year at least. On our retreats, as long as everyone shows up, then we talk about it there and we plan it, and then for the next year, that's what you're basically.
And that's why I suggested it instead of nesting it under the environmental goal, because that goal is in place.
Okay.
And then back to Lisa's earlier comment, then we work together to figure out what the strategies are to make that goal happen.
Okay.
So that becomes us.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I'm hearing from you is, as a board, we want to own the direction of setting the tone. And if you want to own that part, then you have to have it as a fourth goal. Because the things that happen underneath that fourth goal, they happen in CSIPs, and they happen in the work Kingsley's doing with his team, and that's past you. If from your direction, going this way in the strategic plan. And so, you own the ends policies, you own the district goals, and then you hand the baton to me and the team, and then we set the building goals and the classroom goals. So if you want to put that stamp on it, it really comes at that board goal level, and that's why I think it might have to be teased out outside the environmental goal.
That makes sense.
That's my thinking on it.
All right.
Well, I have one suggestion. So if we move on to Appendix 2, 3, and 6, just for the couple things, time-wise, I think we can cover Appendix 3. I would like to come back to Appendix 6 after getting some, maybe an update from Joe on some things that he sees problematic with that. I think we could kind of...
Well, and if I could just share with you, I realize that it's not attached there, so I'll pull it up for you.
Okay.
You want to pull Appendix 3 up? So Appendix 3 is designed to provide you as a board with a framework for those items that will come before you each year. So one of the things that we quickly realized as we were reviewing it to get ready for tonight was that there were things that were not on there that should be on there, and especially we thought about it in the context of new board members. SBRC. So we're going to go to the SBRC for those equity or spending authority issues every year. So what I've asked the team to do is to go back through and literally go back to last July 1, look forward to today, cast forward to June 30 and say, what are the things that recur every single year that we're missing on here? And so we have already come up with a group of other things like the SBRC, the dropout prevention, modified allowable growth, some other things like that, that we are plugging in there. So what you see here again is designed to give you a forecast of the work of the board over the course of the year. Now I'll tell you that there used to be a lot of other reports that were on here that over time, as the board has evolved, board members have said, why is that on here? What is the purpose of that report? And then we've had dialogue, and so some things have gone away. There are other things that they've said, how come I don't know about? And we've added those. So really and this goes back to your earlier comment about how does the work that we do get codified in policy such that it carries forward to whoever sits in these chairs as we rotate through them. So this really should every year provide an annual forecast for what's coming up. The benefit to Kim is she actually uses this in June and builds mock agendas right through to the end of the next June based on the content that's in here. So we're working to fix that. So as a board, one of the things that we ask you to do on an annual basis is to look through here and say, is there stuff that's on there that shouldn't be on there? Is there stuff that's not on there that I'd really like to know about every year? Because we have another column which you can't see on here, you can, but it's not filled in. We call them singular issues. So the board says, you know what, we want to know about asset disposal process. Great, we plug it in here, takes place the first board meeting in November. We're not going to look at that again next year. So we have a singular column that we keep up to speed on our end to make sure we have the materials prepared for you for the board meeting. There are things, though, that will show up on that singular issue that are like, hey, wait a minute. That's an annual piece. You're going to see that again, same bad time, same bad channel. Next year, first meeting in December, you're going to have dropout prevention, modified allowable growth. That needs to be on there. So we're starting to go through now from a process standpoint and make sure that those are included in there. So that's what Appendix 3 is. It's been a significant evolution since I've been here. There used to be a lot more reports on there, and a lot of it literally has been boards looking at it and saying, why are you spending the time doing that? And please don't present it at the meeting. So those have been pared down. So that's what Appendix 3 is. So I guess the only challenge I would have for you, not necessarily a today thing, but over the course of the year, is if you see something that's not on Appendix 3 that you think, this is something we should look at every year, please let me know, and we add it. Or if you see things that you say, my goodness, I would never like to see that again, also please let me know that too, so that we can make sure and go back and say, is that something statutorily you have to know, we got to keep it in there, or is that just make work? So
technically, does this need to be approved? I don't see any other dates.
No.
It's just a rolling.
Nope, it doesn't require board approval. It's really a resource for the board and the community. It's that opportunity when somebody says, hey, when do you get an update on class sizes? Well, you get an update on class sizes in November because We do certified enrollment the first day of October, and then it takes the state about a month to figure out who owns the straggler students out there and give us our certified enrollment number, so we come back the first board meeting in November. So that gives, when people in the community ask you those kinds of questions, you can steer them in that direction, you also know that. So doesn't require board approval, it's just a resource for board members.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, Paul, you want to speed up, I know Appendix 2 evaluation, so as we look at that, I mean, I'm assuming you want that to happen soon, and I don't want to put it off.
Good news is, Janet had a long conversation with me about this, because I steered her to it, she read through it and said, I don't even know if I like the timing of that, the way it's set up.
Okay.
Could we have some conversation about that? I said, absolutely. She said, well, we kind of need to do part of it now, and then we may need to come back and revisit it again. So I did let her know it was on the agenda because it's part of our process, and she said, great, maybe that's something we need to have a further conversation about. Good news is IASB actually has a tool that's very similar to the one you're using for self-assessment.
Okay.
So Kristen plugged that all into the Qualtrics platform, just got it done today. I forwarded that off to Janet this afternoon to take a look at, say, is this what you're looking for? Hopefully I'll hear back from her. That'll allow us to actually get back on track relatively quickly.
Okay.
And then, as she said, great, we'll check that off, say we've done that, but then as we move into the new calendar year, she said that's probably something I'm going to bring back to the P&G group and say, let's have a deeper conversation.
Okay. I like that.
Yeah, and honestly, the reason I said I wanted to come back to this one is because I would like to have that conversation. I did attend a session on this at IASB.
Yep.
Say it wrong. And I think there's some things that we don't do, check-in points and things that I think we really need to do, and that's not on this anywhere.
And Paul shared those resources with me, so I had sent some web links from the ISB website on to Janet.
Is there a reason we haven't been using more ISB stuff in general? I mean, just resistance, or?
At one point in time, it was a question whether you'd even be members of
Well, they had problems that would allow anybody to question to be members. They were
right. So they're in a different place now, and so I think it's a different opportunity for us. I think the self-assessment's a great one. I think I think you're going to like the tool for the superintendent evaluation one. It's actually one of the ones that was in the big print, like not the slides, the packet that you shared with me. So I think you'll like that too. I think it's pretty straightforward.
So have they changed quite a bit? Like, I know they have so they did it like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
We need to not do this.
Yes.
No more embezzling money.
Or raises without approval.
All of that stuff.
So at least those two pieces I would like to come back to. So
Yeah,
I think
for sure.
To have a little bit deeper discussion and maybe more.
I just didn't know if we had to do some action here.
No. Because.
But I do anticipate Janet will come back to you with Appendix 2 and say, let's look at it again. So you'll get a referral or some input from her.
Right, which would, this would just be something we could add to the next meeting agenda to go over, 2 and 6. So if you guys are okay with that. Yeah. So on to agenda setting then for the next meeting, which would be whatever the first Tuesday is in January, right?
January 2nd.
Probably not January 2nd.
Probably not.
So
I think we actually already built that in. I'm sorry, I'm not quick enough. I'm getting to it. I think we looked at casting forward on that big chart, which I'm trying to get to right now for the work that we're doing, because we talked to Joe about Appendix 6. Where am I finding that? Board policy, here we go. So we have, for this cycle, we've got the legally mandated 6, I don't have to write.
it's 600 policies.
600 policies.
But those are coming back in the spring, right? So these
Yeah.
are
February.
spring.
We put them in a, I don't have it, the order. We kind of said, okay, if Joe can get these done by this point in time, we can bring that back in this month, and we can do this
February?
month and this
Yeah,
month.
It was February.
Yeah, and I'm just not pulling it up. I wrote months next to it somewhere, but I'm not finding it here. So I want to say, did we say February? Joe said he could have those back because we asked him that. And then we've got board governance levels 2A through H, which sounds like a ton, but each of those levels is usually 2 sentences. So it's an opportunity to review through that. So if you think about March, for doing those, because that's something you do, that's not something you have to bring Joe in for. And then you've got superintendent directions, and you've got H, I, and J. And just recognize that J may require a little more attention as we move into the spring, because that's the one that helps me when I look at my aspirational goals for schools. So that might be of a bit more interest to you in the community as we're kind of moving through some of those attendance zone questions. So if you think about that in April, that's probably a good time to look at it and to have that conversation contemporaneously, excuse me, with that. So if you've got superintendent, or if you've got legally mandated policies, 600 series in February, you've got board governance 2A through H in March, and you've got superintendent directions 2H, I, and J in April. Then we can sprinkle in Appendix 6 and Appendix 2 as we move through it based on timeliness and resource availability and those kinds of things.
And then the 4 other things on there, the ends policies, which we have to await whatever new test we're getting, right?
Yes, so the ends policies are math and science, and that's just a review by the board. It's usually, we've gotten into wordsmithing on that to make sure that they meet what we need, so we can put those in. Those are, again, you have seen those. Those are a couple of sentences, so not a huge burden for you in terms of review and suggestions.
Or the other 2 things were blue zones and administrative regulations are in this cycle.
Which ones?
Blue zone.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, you've got the old one. I cleaned that up. Blue zones was something that we did in the last cycle, so that you can cross off. What's the other one that's at the bottom of yours?
Administrative regulations.
You can cross that off too. So those were one-timers. You'll find things that'll wind up in the other section. So again, this is kind of like MIS. These are the things that show up every year. And we have some singular issues like blue zones that required us to make some policy changes so that we could make sure our Iowa City schools could participate in the Iowa City Communities Blue Zones Initiative.
Okay. So the next meeting will be not until February. Is that what we're getting at?
Right, and we'll have Joe back with the 600
Okay.
policies.
And then, since he's going to be here, can we try and do Appendix 6 as well?
Sure. And we might even want to take a stab at the ends policies.
So February 6th is the first Tuesday?
I think that's right.
I don't know if I'm...
What do you think about that? Is that too much?
I don't know why I'm questioning, because I'm
Math,
limited.
science,
Yeah, I just didn't know if we were waiting on, I thought, I wrote down that we were waiting, wasn't there, whatever the test is going to be, or?
Oh, I think actually it was it an ESSA thing that Diane was having us hold on for math?
Yeah.
We might want to hold on that then, push that back. You're right.
Okay, so Kim, you got that, February 6th, 600.
Appendix 6.
Appendix 6.
Appendix 6.
What was the second thing you said?
Appendix 6.
600s.
Okay,
Oh,
so just 2 things, Appendix 6 and 600 series?
All right.
Gotcha.
Then, I guess at some point, because that's when we're talking 600s, we may need to start discussing the change.
Streamlining it
Yeah,
completely. And that's curriculum, right? So that should be.
yeah.
fairly-
That's an easier one, just
Yeah.
because there aren't a lot of curriculum policies.
Right.
So it will require from the admin team, just so you know that, Kim remembers it, she was one of the only ones that was here when we did it last time. That alignment and scrubbing policy is a pain.
I
So-
don't, I know.
But if we
Like I
don't,
said, I feel bad.
we don't eat the elephant one bite at a time, we're never gonna get done.
Exactly.
So-
And it'll be, and no matter what, we'll keep adding stuff,
Yeah.
and every time.
I'd rather start stripping some of the branches and recognize that over a few years, it's gonna get pared down.
I think that's why it was so hard, is we tried to do it all at once.
Yeah, we did.
And it
We did
was-
the whole thing at once. We literally,
That's
I
bad.
said, you're doing this, you're doing this, you're doing this. So Peterson and, went around the table and everybody got their piece, and then Ann and Becky, and they just they had a month
A
to
lot
do
of
it.
things.
So
Because the board purged all the,
more.
yeah, the board purged all the policies that weren't legally mandated. They just said, okay, we took a vote and they're gone. And we're like,
Hey,
So,
Paul, here's one thing for future just discussion with P&G. During campaign, we talked a lot about people saying, oh, 3 readings, right? But now that I'm here, I'm like, So we do 14 readings on a building project. So it doesn't, but what I don't also like is that we make motions from the board table and it becomes policy that night. That doesn't make sense to me. That we can just make a motion and these guys all now have different marching orders. That's something I think we can talk about doing a 3 reading, because you can make a motion, you can vote. Now we're going to get community feedback because we're not touching this again for 2 more weeks. At staff and community feedback, right?
So, and I think, if I could add, one of the things that I think goes back to what Joe said is, because I think what you're referring to, and I think what we're hearing from the community is readings on policy.
Mm-hmm.
So think about things that we don't call policy that are, I think, what they're referring to. So think about 3J, the aspirational class sizes, right? So that really is a policy. So if we move through the 600s and then move on to the next one and start stripping away things that have different titles connected to them that are really policies, and because that superintendent direction is really a policy. It's a board policy,
Right.
but it's not called that. So if you think about doing 3 readings for policies,
Yeah.
then that gives the community the opportunity to say, hey, and come to the P&G meeting. I don't understand what that is. It's posted, and that gives you time to then process the policy.
Right.
You can always collapse second, third reading, so it really could happen in 2. So I don't have any issue with us looking at policies and saying we're going to give those 3 readings. And if we're going to look at condensing and stripping things out of directions and limitations and other places where it's hiding and putting it into policy, that's probably actually a good idea right now, is to say, here's the new 600 policies and here's all the stuff that we've incorporated into it that we've swept out of these other things. That'll make the transition visible. And you can do it in pretty short order.
Well, I mean, correct me, Paul, that triggered that special election, was a decision at the board table, and now, when we ran, and that's what triggered, that was this sudden change in a policy that had been, which technically could happen any time at any meeting. You could, if you had 4 votes, you just make any motion, and there's no mechanism preventing us from radically changing our policy on any given meeting, if it's on the agenda. And I just think as a governance thing, that would be smarter to slow us down, get input. And I don't know when, again.
Policy should work a little bit slower.
A little bit policy.
When I first heard, the conversation about 3 readings, some of the people that I talked to were thinking every item on the agenda, and I'm like, oh my goodness, we'll grind to a halt, never get anything done.
Oh my.
But policy makes some sense, because policy ought to be slow and deliberate.
Mm-hmm.
Because you don't want to turn your aircraft carrier like that. It should be a gradual curve. So.
But again,
I think
that is what some people think when they hear 3 readings, that it's every single thing. So
But they
I just
don't-
want to
I can
have that
guarantee you,
clarification.
I
That's
doubt
what
any of those
even at our
people-
board table, that's what some people think.
I would doubt that anybody's going to say, we want to do 3 readings every time one of those building processes come up. 'Cause if we do 14 now,
No, I agree, it's
No,
not,
so I
right,
don't
but
know that they thought-
it's not everything. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Exactly.
It's not everything, but it's certain things that get under people's skin, that they want 3
Wow.
readings. So that's what I'm saying,
Mhm.
we have to be careful that it can't be that, because it just wouldn't work. So it's really related to new policy,
Mhm.
not every single vote that
Let's
ticks off certain people.
add this as the 3rd thing on our meeting for February, so that we can just discuss
Yeah,
it
sounds
on
good.
the agenda.
That's
then.
great, thanks.
And then that's, like we said, it's a governing piece, and we can pull up the history as we used to have it, and it went away. So, there's a reason probably behind that, but that as the 3rd item.
Gotcha.
And with that, I would entertain a motion to,
I move that we adjourn.
A second?
all in favor?
Aye.
Perfect. Let's extend it to basketball.